Okay, I'm going to introduce you and then we'll just have a good conversation. Okay?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds
I
like a
have,
plan.
okay. I have the pleasure of interviewing Bill Lennon today. Although I've interviewed several people about their struggles with anxiety, I particularly relate to Bill's story. But first, Bill has helped companies ranging from Google to Walmart, hotels, and restaurants with products, teams, and solutions. Now he's into education as well. Bill, it was the serendipitous request from a friend that started your career. Would you tell us about it, please?
So yeah, I this guy that I knew had started a web development business, and I was looking for something new to do. I'd been selling real estate, wasn't very good at it, wasn't really enjoying it, and he was trying to make sales at a couple of sporting goods stores. The owners of the stores I knew well because I'd been a repeat customer of them for years. And he said, "Could you call these guys and pitch my website building service for them because you know them?"
Uh huh.
And I was like, "Sure, yeah, no problem. I'll give them a call, no big deal." I called them. They both said yes. And that turned into him saying, "Could you do this more?" And I said, "Well, sure. I'm looking for something new, but I need to learn what what are we doing, right? Because I
Yeah.
have no I had no computer science background at all,
Wow.
and that turned into me sitting down with the engineers every day and starting to learn how to code, um, and then starting to working on code. And then one day they said, "Hey, by the way, this stuff in production, you wrote it." And I was like, "Holy cow! I'm a beginner." And they're like, "Yeah, but we just guardrailed you and kept you in this one particular area, and now it's in production." And
Gosh, how fun.
yeah, and then I just kept from then on, every time there was something new that came in the door, they'd say, "Here, Bill, go play with this and see if we can use it." And so um, what that turned into was me getting really early access to online payment systems.
Hmm.
This is like the very early days of PayPal and credit card transactions online, and things we take for granted today, but back then they were brand new. I got to do very early live camera on the web,
Uh huh.
and I got to design and build database driven websites at a time when almost nobody was doing that.
Programming is a long way from real estate sales.
It's yeah, I totally get that.
But you know how amazing that it really brought out a skill in you that you
Yeah,
didn't know you had.
yeah, and then that was a tiny company. They didn't make it, and then I went to another company and learned a bunch more skills, learned more programming languages, all user experiences, um, much more complex systems, and that's when I started running software teams,
Uh huh.
and that was a whole new set of things to learn. Yeah.
The the anxiety that you talked about in the written interview was a
Mhm.
particular kind triggered by social situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was painfully shy as a child and still must plan strategies to cope in social situations.
Hmm.
So I really related to your statement, when in doubt, wash the dishes, because I'm known as the dishwasher in our family. So,
Yeah.
how did you discover that dishwashing was soothing to your anxiety?
I Part of it's because growing up, whenever and I like I'm thinking back to my teen years, we had at my house we hosted Christmas and Thanksgiving parties
Yes.
for like, I don't know, 8 or 10 families.
Yeah.
And invariably at the end of the night, I was washing dishes in the sink. And oftentimes when we went to, this was kind of this rotating thing we had with a bunch of families.
Uh-huh.
And when we were at, say, the Miller's house, again, I'd be washing dishes in the sink.
Okay.
And that was kind of a theme that it, depending on who was hosting, there was like a 50-50 chance I'd be part of the dishwashing crew at the end of the night.
Yes.
And so then when I got older and we started hosting parties at our house, invariably I was washing dishes in the sink. And I kind of just translated that to any time that I went to a party, I would do dishwashing and help with the cleanup.
Yeah.
And partly it's because I'm not a cook, right? And so um I don't, like, I can help with prep, right? And I can make scrambled eggs in a salad. But
Okay.
those two things don't go over well at parties
Okay.
usually. And but the cleanup is always really helpful for everybody.
Yes.
And so
Appreciate.
yeah, I just started doing that because usually by the end of the night, whoever's hosting is tired,
Uh-huh.
both physically and emotionally. And I'm not. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, okay, I'll just wash the dishes, and it makes life better for them. And it's
Uh-huh.
super easy for me.
Uh-huh.
And they're always really appreciative that they don't have to do the dishes. And
I
so, just, yeah, just it's a win all the way around. Yeah.
it's a role that I also have adopted that helps me and helps the host. What are the steps that led you out of the prison of silence in social situations?
Awesome question. Um, so the starting point was I had to have two compelling reasons. I maybe could have done it with one, but having two made it a lot more impactful for me. Um,
Okay.
the first one was I had this realization that my career was kind of stuck. I wasn't moving forward in my career, and it was because I was afraid to network.
I see.
And that has a whole bunch of knock-on impacts that I didn't even realize. I just knew that there was stuff that was in the way, right? That was one, and I was super frustrated because I didn't know how to approach it. And then my older son was born, and I realized that I didn't want to be a role model that wouldn't talk to strangers.
Mm-hmm.
And because I wanted one of my long-term aspirations is to have my kids be better prepared for life at
Yeah.
whatever age than I was at that time,
Yes.
which is very much a moving target. I completely get that. And in some ways I've been successful, in some ways I haven't. But with those two drivers of, my kid, now both my kids, and my career, I started talking to people about this. And I was talking with a friend who's very comfortable socially, and 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 she was like, well, you talk with me really, like, you have an easy time talking with me, what's and I see you talk with, and she was rattling off people that we knew, and I'm like, yeah, but that's all friends of mine, that's all people that
Right.
we've been together and we've built relationships, and so I have an easy time, but I can't do it with strangers.
Uh-huh.
And so she said, well, what's the hard part? What's the hard thing? And I said, well, I don't know how to start a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, oh, well, that's super easy, just ask them how their day's going. And I said, really? And she was like, that's it, really. And so from then I was like, okay, I can do that. And then I said, well, how do we practice it? And so we came up with this thing for me to do, this behavior, right? Which was walk into Starbucks, order a cup of coffee or water or whatever. And when the barista came and gave it to me, say, thank you. And how's your day going? And then whatever they said, just say, thank you. I hope the rest of the day goes well, and leave.
Uh-huh.
And then congratulate myself for doing a rep.
Yes.
And years later, I discovered this is the Tiny Habits format.
Yes.
There's a book called Tiny Habits. But I used that, and it took me 2 weeks for it to become easy, of
Uh-huh.
going in pretty much every day. And then I started branching out to, I'm at the grocery store and I'm
Uh,
checking out, and I'm, thanks for helping me. And how's your day going? And so after a couple of weeks, that was easy. And then the next question was, okay, what's the next level up?
yeah.
What's the next, how do I go next? And the next one was 5-minute networking. And so I started going to these 5-minute networking events. And before I went, I created a set of questions to ask so that I knew what to say. Like, I gave myself a script.
A script, yes.
And because there was only 5 minutes, I knew there was a time box, right?
Yeah.
And that was a couple things that we came up with that initial thing was, number one, there's a time box. So I know no matter what, I'm only going to be in this uncomfortable situation for this much time, right? With the Starbucks, it was 2 minutes, right?
Uh-huh.
That's as long as it takes to get a cup of coffee. And to have them respond to my question, right? 5-minute
Right.
networking, it was just 5 minutes. And one of the ahas that I had along the way is, if I'm asking somebody a question, I don't have to talk about myself.
Yes.
And my fear was, I didn't know what to say about myself that, like, was interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to sound boring. And so I figured, if I ask questions about them, I get to learn about them, number one. People like talking about themselves, so they're going to
Yes.
be happy to do it. And I don't have to talk about myself, which at that time made me really uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And so I made a script for the 5-minute networking events, which in hindsight was really interesting, because I almost never talked about myself. Like, the 5-minute networking would start. I start asking questions. Invariably at 2.5, they would say switch, but the other person would be talking to me, and I'd say continue.
Yes.
And we'd get to like 30 seconds, and they'd say, like, well, wait, what are you doing here? And I'd be like, I'm just here to practice talking to strangers. And they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, this is a practice for me to be able to talk with strangers, and I really appreciate you playing along and, like, being
Yeah.
part of this conversation, and like, helping me to do this, right? And people were like, you're very, very welcome, and why do you need help?
Because
Like,
as long as you're asking questions, it appears you're doing great.
exactly, yeah. And so then 5 minutes got to be easy, and then it was 15 minutes, and
Uh,
then I had to have something to say.
yes.
And so I started thinking, it was like, okay, what do I say? What are they gonna ask? And I started off, they'd say, like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I run software teams. I design products for companies. And in my spare time, I go mountain biking and I windsurf, and sometimes I go rock climbing.
Uh-huh.
And that invariably, people would be like, wait, hang on, back up. And they'd ask a question about something that I'd said,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then that would turn into a conversation. Yeah.
Because you were
Um,
offering them a variety of topics to
yeah.
respond
Yeah.
to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I tried to keep it short, and it gave them, like, multiple categories of areas to talk about.
Uh-huh.
And then it was 30-minute networking, and much longer, right? And by that point in time, I was pretty comfortable talking. And then the
Yes.
next level was presenting. Kind of the next
Yes.
branch, right, was presenting. And so I started off with presenting to my software teams. Very short. And I told them in advance, hey, I need to get better at presenting. I'd like you to be guinea pigs. Are you okay with that? And they were
Uh-huh.
like, sure, what, yeah, of course. Yeah. What do you want? And so I started learning, number one, how to use presentation software because it wasn't part of my schooling. And then how to do presentations that the audience thought were interesting.
Uh-huh.
What's the content that needs to be in there? What do I need to be saying versus what's up on the screen?
Yeah.
Um, and then that turned into one of the executives that I worked with asking me to help him with his presentations.
Wow.
Yeah. Which ultimately what he wanted was me to be presenting, but he wanted to see what it was going to be like. So he started off with, here, make a slide about what your team is doing and I'll do it. Right. And I'm like, okay, great. No problem. So I gave it to him, here's the display, here's the notes, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, okay, the next up was, here's all the stuff that this other team is doing. Make that like yours. So for consistency. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, okay. So I made all their stuff. And then he said, okay, why don't you do your own? When you come in, do your stuff. And then it was do yours and the other team. And then it was do everything in the department. And he didn't do anything like other
Yeah.
than introduce me like, oh, Bill's going to do this stuff now. And that, got bigger, over the course of different companies. And then 5 years ago, I decided I really wanted to be able to do public speaking. And 7 years ago, actually, yeah, it was pre-COVID. And so I kind of sat down and I really thought through, like, what is it about public speaking that scares me? Like, in very as granular as I can get the details. And
Yes.
so I came up with a few things. One of them was I might lose the technology, right? And what do I do now, right? And so the solution to that was pretty easy. It's only talk about stuff that I know really, really well, and I can do the whole talk without any cues, right?
Yes.
So just in case the power goes out, and I've got
Right.
nothing, right?
Right.
Um, and also make sure that I've practiced a bunch. And so for talks that I've never done before, I'll do 20 to 30, maybe 40 practice runs where I record them.
Yes.
And that way, I record it and then I go back and I look at the video and I'm like, oh, whatever, doesn't work, fix it. And basically I have the whole talk memorized by the time I've done that many times, right? I don't even need the notes or anything anymore.
Yeah.
And then another piece of it was, I don't know anybody. It's all strangers. What do I do? And so the solution to that was go early, meet the organizers, help with all the setup. And now I know some people, right?
Yes.
And then go and work the door where people are coming in.
Oh, so smart.
And thank you. Thank you. Say, hi, my name is Bill. I'll be one of the speakers tonight. I just, thanks for coming. I hope you find the content of tonight's talk, all of us, interesting, right? What's your name? And they would tell me, and it was great, right? Thanks, Nancy. I'm great to meet you. And by all means, if you have any questions for me, like, just raise your hand and speak up, right? We're not being very formal. And I would, however many people I could do that with, I would. And then I did time boxing. The first talk that I did was only 5 minutes. I just wanted to get up and speak for 5 minutes, and that was it, right? And so I scheduled 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and 30 minutes for 3 talks. And then also, before I got on stage, I did slow exhale breath. And slow exhale breath slows your heart rate and it drops your cortisol level.
Yes.
And so it helps you. It's a biological thing, right? It helps you to be calm, calms down your brain chemistry. And so now when I got up, number one, I knew the content really, really well. Number two, I could see people in the crowd that I recognized, right? It wasn't just a sea of strangers.
Yes.
Before I got up on stage, I had done the long exhale breath. And so I was a lot calmer. Oh, and the last one was um, reminding myself that the physical sensation I'm feeling before I get up on stage, it's not fight flight. It's one of the other four stress responses. It was
Uh-huh.
actually excite, delight, rise to the challenge, or tend, befriend,
Okay.
because we have four different stress responses that are very similar biologically, but not identical. They have different neurochemical signatures. And so,
This is new information for me. So would you
oh,
repeat those?
yeah, of course, yes. So we now know that there's four kinds of stress, right? Almost everybody's heard of fight, flight, freeze.
Yes.
There's something physically dangerous, and what do I do, right? And there's a set of biological things that happen in our body. We get adrenaline going on. We get a shot of cortisol. Um, People get butterflies because their thoracic cavity is shrinking, and it's
Yes.
pumping blood out to the muscles, right? Well, there's three other kinds of stress we also have. Each one has a different neurochemical signature.
Okay.
And I don't remember these perfectly. Um, Excite, delight is being a performer, getting up on stage and performing. And you get endorphins, and I think dopamine is the other one.
Okay.
Um, and then the second one is tend, befriend. And tend, befriend is tend, like tend and befriend,
Yeah.
TEND, and
Okay.
befriend.
And
And
in
tend and befriend is when you're helping someone or teaching them. So the classic example is I'm helping somebody cross the street, or I'm helping somebody carry their groceries out to their car, or I'm teaching somebody how to do something, right? I'm
oh,
teaching one of my kids, or I'm
okay.
coaching somebody, whatever it is, right? Temperament. And so the neurochemistry there is, um, as I recall, it is serotonin and oxytocin.
Okay.
And then rise to the challenge is just what it sounds like, right? I'm seeing something as a challenge. And that one also gets endorphins and I want to say serotonin. And we can choose, like we can, as we're feeling a sensation, we can say, oh, this is my body getting me ready
Okay.
for to perform, right? This is me. What I'm really feeling isn't, I'm not afraid. I'm actually excited about getting up on stage and performing. And that thought completely changes your experience. You're like, oh yeah, I am ready, right? Um, and so that's the other piece of it that I did. And so I did this 5-minute talk, and got down and went to the back and like asked one of the organizers, like, how was that? And they were like, oh, it was great. Like, you did great. But like everybody's paying attention to you, and the crowd was like interested. And why are you asking? And I'm like, because I've never done that before. And they said, really? Like, I didn't know that. Um, and so then the next one was longer, and it was supposed to be 15 minutes, but it turned into 30 because it was a panel
Uh-huh.
that I did. Um, and it was a panel about um, career related stuff, right? And so we, got up. There was some canned questions, and there was audience questions, and it was easy, partly because I did all the things I'd done before, but also it was easy because there was other people on stage with me, and I
Yes.
felt like I had allies with me,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that was definitely one of those tend, befriend, because we're helping people understand how to advance their careers. Because
Uh-huh.
everybody up on stage we'd all been in tech at that point in time for at least a decade, at everything from startups to big companies, broad experience, right? But we were helping people understand that the audience was mostly people that were new in their careers.
Yes.
And so that was easy in that way. But again, I got there early. I helped with setup, met people at the door, slow exhale breath before I get up on stage, all that stuff. And then the next one was another panel. Actually, I did four, come to think of it. I did another panel, um, like 100 people in the audience.
Okay.
And we did 45 minutes of panel Q&A, and then we broke up and the audience broke up into groups and we cycled around. So it was just one of us with a group of 20 people, and we were kind of answering their questions, whatever. And again, same thing. I met people when I got there, help with setup, long exhale breath. This is my chance to do Tend and Befriend and Excite Delight. So great.
Uh-huh.
And then I did one that was just me, that was supposed to be 45 minutes. And it was about, I think it was leadership and emotional resilience.
Okay.
And the Q&A just went on and on and on and on. Like, people could not stop asking questions. You know, they were like, what about blah, blah, blah. And I think that ended up being an hour, maybe an hour and a half.
Uh-huh.
But again, same process. I knew the content down cold. I showed up early and helped set up. I greeted people at the door, long exhale breath, choose my stress response. And then when that was done, I was like, okay, that was super fun.
Well, it was audience led,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
And it was easy.
Yes.
And it was easy because I knew the content, right?
Yes.
It's easy to talk about it for a while, and then, okay, what kind of questions do you guys have, right?
Yes.
And so, that's, I've taught that to other people now, like, to do the exact same thing.
I have hopes that I'll be a TEDx speaker at some point in time.
Oh, nice.
And you've already
Awesome.
given me several tips that I'm going to use that
Oh,
will
excellent. Yeah.
really.
Yeah. It's so I'm a huge fan of learning things in baby steps
Yes.
because it works, right?
Uh-huh.
Right. Babies don't just get up and start running, right?
Right.
Usain Bolt did not start off as a sprinter that was world class. He started off like every other baby, rolling over, right?
Yes.
And so if I can figure out how to break something down to what's a starting point that's tiny that I can manage, right? And then what's the next piece, and then what's the next piece, and what's the next piece, and
Yes.
and how do I break it down to small pieces? And if I know I've got the end goal in mind and I've got a starting point, even if my path is meandering, I know I'll get there sooner or later,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm never trying to go for, like, from nothing to public speaking, right?
Yes.
I'm just doing little tiny, nibble away pieces at it.
Yes.
And, that's how we learn math, right?
It's how we learn anything,
Right.
really.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
teach communication skills to couples that are in conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to replace poor skills with new skills that are unfamiliar, but
Yeah.
your emphasis on repetition is what I emphasize for them all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And it's that one of the things that I realize is that the more reps you get in, the easier it gets.
Yes.
And that applies to everything. It applies to talking with strangers. It applies to presenting.
Yeah.
It's how I am with my kids. It's how I am with my team, how I am with my partner.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it gives, it's kind of like, how to juggle?
I probably could if I had to, but I'm not good at it.
If you learn how to juggle, right, or surf, um, or dance, right, you start off with the basics, and then
Yes.
as you get better, then you have more options, right,
Yeah.
and you can string different pieces together.
Yes.
um, and so for me, the reps give me freedom to have this part become muscle memory.
Yes.
And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I can add this thing in, right? Now I can try this new thing I haven't tried before.
It gives you flexibility, does.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 And so for me, I always think about that. I'm like, oh, this is scary right now because I haven't done enough reps, or
Yeah.
I'm not very good at it right now because I haven't done enough reps. And
I love it. I love
yeah,
it.
yeah. And I used to surf a
Uh-huh.
lot. I mostly grew up in Hawaii. And I noticed this thing when I took people who hadn't surfed to the ocean, where I'd be looking out, I go, oh, there's a wave coming. It's right there. And it's going to, like, the peak's going to be right. Like, it's going to come, it looks like you can see it over there, and the peak's going to be right here. It's just where the wave's going to be. If you want to catch it, turn around and paddle now. And they'd be like, what are you seeing? And I'm like, it's right there. It's totally obvious.
Uh-huh.
That's the problem. But it was an unconscious competency
Yes.
that developed from hundreds of thousands of reps of
Yes.
looking at waves and trying to predict how they would go and figuring out the pattern, right?
Right.
And if you haven't done that, then the ocean just looks like a mass of blue water and there's no differentiation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of reps, and it's one of the things I've found is that from an anxiety perspective, every kind of anxiety I've run across, both for myself or for anybody else, if you break it down to baby steps, and it's a lack of skill, right?
Yeah.
And if you break it down to the baby steps and you learn how to build the skill stack, and you actually do the work and you practice it, at some point in time, the anxiety becomes not there anymore, because you can do something, right?
It's so liberating.
Yeah, totally.
My late husband never met a stranger, and I always admired that about him. But when he was a young boy and was shy, his mother challenged him to see if he could always be the first one to speak to
Mm,
somebody he didn't know. And it's that first step that you
right.
described.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And, over time, and he was a public performer. He was a fabulous baritone singer,
Mm-hmm.
and could sing in front of thousands of people without anxiety.
Wow.
I just love that about him, and I know it started with his mother's suggestion.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's awesome parenting.
Yes,
Mad props to his mom. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So, what is your biggest takeaway learning from that whole progression that you just described?
Um, so there's a few. One of them is that nothing in the world's actually hard and nothing in the world's actually scary, because there's somebody that sees that thing as a playground, right? That terrifies me, right? And it doesn't matter what it is, right? I'm afraid of heights, but I know there's people that love jumping out of airplanes, right?
Yeah,
Okay, great. But I'm not there yet. Um, I love playing in the water. I love water sports, right? And I've taught my kids to feel totally free in the water. And
uh-huh,
yet we also know people who can't swim who
right.
think that my kids and I are completely insane, right?
Uh,
Same water, it's just different perspectives, right? And so for me, there's this, oh, I can figure it out. I can break it down to baby steps. I might get it wrong. Okay, great. I'll have to, barring death, I can always unwind something and then redo it again, right?
yes,
Not a big deal. It's all a learning process. And humans learn more from mistakes than they do from success,
yes,
which means if you really want to be successful, you just got to make more mistakes. And so, and like when you look at the most successful people in the world, their mistake list of getting stuff wrong is gigantic, you
yeah,
know? People talk about Elon Musk and, all the stuff he does, but they don't talk so much about like all the rockets that SpaceX launched that blew up,
yeah,
right? Or they crashed, right? Like repeatedly over and over and over again, because he was trying to get incrementally better. And he was willing to sacrifice the rockets because it was learning, right?
yeah,
They were learning. And same thing with Tesla. They did a bunch of experiments and tried a bunch of stuff, and had a bunch of failures along the way, and they finally got to the point they're at right now. I got to meet a guy who runs their supply chain and told me this story about how when they came up with the funky doors on the what's it called? I think it's called Model X. They had these special hinges made, right? They designed these hinges that all this complex mechanics, and they had this manufacturer making them, and all the prototypes were great, except that when they got the real ones, they didn't work.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. And they were like, oh my God, what do we do? Right? Because we can't put these in the cars and then ship them because the doors won't open.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of a safety hazard, right?
Yeah.
And so, he's like, okay, we got to fix it, right? We know the original thing worked. What's the difference between the original thing and the manufacturing? And it was some really trivial thing in the manufacturing that had changed from how they built the prototype to the finals. And so then they were like, okay, well, we'll solve that problem. And then they got the hinges all worked, right? That's part of Elon's legacy, is all the mistakes, right? And for me, knowing that, oh yeah, the reason that this person is great at blah, blah, blah is because they've made more mistakes in that arena than I have, which has gotten them to that level.
And they've performed more repetitions.
Way more. Yeah.
You've set such a great example for me and others who fear public speaking or fear anything else. I love your comment, and I'm quoting you, "It's only stressful because I haven't done enough reps."
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And I also loved your comment that anyone can control a conversation by asking questions. That's my favorite tactic, has become my favorite tactic. When I'm really miserable and I go into a social event, I used to look around the room and find anyone who looked more out of place or uncomfortable than me, and I go and start talking to them. That was a strategy I used to manage my own shyness in a group.
Yeah.
So listen, Bill, tell me, or tell the viewers, where can they reach you?
So, Bill at 40pb.com. That's me at work.
Okay.
Right? I'm on LinkedIn, WB Lennon. I'm on TikTok at Bill Lennon with 3 L's in the middle.
Okay.
Sorry. I do some writing on Medium. Again, Bill Lennon. I'm, kind of boring and consistent like that. And if you want to find longer form on YouTube, it's under 40% Better. And 40% Better is leadership training for first level team leads. Because number one, nobody trains those people how to do their jobs really, really well.
That's
the
so
first
true.
problem. Number two, if you want a company to make more money or be more productive, the highest leverage to help individual contributors be more productive, it is the team lead. And so, I spent my career building or improving software teams that both confounded my peers and delighted the executives.
Okay.
Because I systematized helping the team. 2 big things that happened there. Number one, a very high degree of psychological safety. I figured out how to have them feel super safe. And number two,
so important.
Yeah, leveraging intrinsic motivation. So I figured out what it was they wanted to do that was going to make them happy, that met obviously the goals of the team.
Yes.
And when you get people to do and to be intrinsically motivated, number one, they do amazing quality work, but number two, they're just straight up more productive.
Yes.
And it's not like they're working 16 hours a day. It's just they see things differently, and in 5 or 6 hours they're super productive.
Everyone's more creative when they feel psychologically safe.
Yes. And when they're doing work they love. Yeah. Yeah.
Children learn better in school when they feel comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I built a system that trains team leads and want to be team leads, people who'd like to do that. Uh,
Yes.
and I'm very much a systems thinker. Like just like I figured out how to get through the whole anxiety thing, everything else is what are the baby steps, and 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 understanding where the challenges are for people and what are the 5 pillars that allow them to be great team leads.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what I do now, is help people do that. Yeah.
It sounds fascinating, and
Thank you.
I love everything you've shared with me tonight. It's going to
I
be
appreciate it.
personally helpful to me as well as anyone else who watches this video.
I'm glad I can help you.
You viewers can read the article that Bill contributed to Authority Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Video, Bill, I'll send you a copy of it, although I know
Beautiful.
you're
Thank you.
recording it also.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll also let you know when it has been attached to your written article on Authority
Oh,
Magazine.
excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Such a pleasure talking with you tonight. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Anytime you want to talk, let's get connected on LinkedIn. And I've got your email now anyway. So yeah.
Good. I'd love that.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good weekend.
And you as well.